Hello, YouTube family and friends. How are you today? It's the early part of December 2021 here in Sammamish, Washington. And at this time of year, around the holidays, and as the fall quarter wraps up and the school year and calendar year wrap up, I'm often thinking introspectively, being philosophical. So that's what we're going to share in today's video. Some thoughts about limits. Limits can be hard to talk about because I think, especially in Western culture, we don't like the idea of limits. Limits imply constraints, and we're all about freedom. We all want to be able to do almost whatever we want to do. When we talk about limits in the context of creativity, though, limits are helpful, even though we may not see them that way initially. So we're going to unpack this, talk about it, and share a few ideas here. So let's start with an experience I think we've all had, and it's the paralysis of possibilities. The paralysis of possibilities. Here's what I mean. If we have unlimited options, unlimited choices, and a finite amount of time or some other limited resources, here's what happens. Sometimes we don't choose anything, which is, as our friends in Rush remind us, when you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Here's a specific example. A couple weeks ago, I had a couple hours of free time and I thought, I have to catch up on some Netflix. So I'm looking through my list, I'm looking through what's new, I'm looking through all the genres, I'm looking through everything, and I probably spent a half hour or an hour of my available time trying to decide what to watch. I couldn't decide because, ooh, that looks good, or what if I don't like this, or what if I don't enjoy that? So in the midst of that, I ended up not watching anything. I probably just did some Instagram on my phone. So in the midst of all those choices, I couldn't decide on one. And here's a helpful perspective I have when I'm trying to make choices. A couple of them, at least two. First, most choices aren't permanent. You can always change your mind. Second, most choices will never be perfect. In fact, I think all choices will never be perfect. There's always something not quite right, not the best fit. So when it comes to creativity and trying to decide what to create, how to create it, what tools to use to create it, those perspectives are helpful. Remember, it's not permanent. You can always create something else. And second, whatever you create, however you choose to create it, wherever you create it, whenever you create it, will never be perfect. So let me give another example, and this is, I think, really true of any creative endeavor that really revolves around technology, really revolves around, I think it may even be more true of photography than just about anything else. And here's an example. This morning on one of the Fuji film photography Facebook pages I am a member of, someone wrote an 819, yes, I didn't count, but I let Word count it for me, 819 word post about their disappointment in a lens. Let me show you the lens. So this is the lens this person was talking about. It's the Midicon Speedmaster 35mm f.95 lens for Fujifilm X. So it's a very fast aperture, large opening, manual focus lens, okay? On sale right now for $500. So not an inexpensive lens by a long shot, but it's not the most expensive lens ever either. So given that lens, this person it was an interesting dialogue they were having with themselves through the post. They were posting that, I love the lens, it's great quality at f.95, so much light, the beautiful background blur, I love it. But when I go to take photos of the things I love creating photos most of, which is people being candid, I miss a lot of photos because of the manual focus. And because of the f.95, shallow depth of field. If they move just a little bit while they're talking, I have to refocus or I miss the focus. So they're fighting multiple limits here, literally fighting it. They acknowledge that they're not good at manual focus. They acknowledge that f.95, which is where this lens is built for is not ideal for their situation. So they're fighting against the limits rather than embracing them and finding freedom in it. And instead, they mentioned in the post what they often do is in situations where they're taking candid photos of people, they will rely on one of their autofocus lenses. So, and they acknowledged all this, but it's interesting to see that struggle, that the limits of both technical in the lens itself and the limits of the photographer being not great at manual focusing are like a perfect storm of disappointment in this case. So I think our fight against these limits comes from a couple places. One, we're living an awesome time where most of our technology is really mature and it's really, really good. It's technically good, it's aesthetically good, it's amazingly affordable compared to what it used to be especially, and it lets us do lots and lots of things. So then that couples with part two, which is, I think a lot of us as creatives, and I know this happens to me, we're afraid to be authentic in our sharing. And so we blame why we didn't create what we wanted to create on the gear that we used to create it. You never hear a painter complain, at least I've never heard of it, never read a Facebook post about a painter complaining, this painting didn't turn out because this brush was crap. But photographers will complain, this photo didn't turn out because this lens, this camera, the autofocus isn't as good as this system or whatever. We complain rather than acknowledge that there will always be limits. Nothing is perfect and it's not permanent. So once you embrace that, that allows you the freedom to work with what you have. And I'm going to borrow a quote from Zach Arias here and say, when you're not sure where to start somewhere. Again, it's not permanent and it doesn't have to be perfect. Let me give you a personal example from the Wayback Machine, at least a little bit, of how limits has helped me in a certain be creative, and acknowledging that there are limits helps you focus then on what is possible, because you know a lot of what isn't possible. They say oftentimes that for writers, the scariest thing is the blank page or the blank screen, because there's only possibilities. So you have to put limits, put fences around what you're creating. Start somewhere, start with the first sentence, start with a story idea, start with a photography idea, a concept. And from there, you know a lot about what you're not gonna do. Let me give you an example. So this was my first digital camera, the Minolta Dimage S404. 4 megapixels, people. 4 megapixels. Runs on 4 AA batteries, and it shoots to compact flash card, and it does everything slow. From turning on to focusing to image capture after you push the button to capture the photo, it's slow. And I was using this camera to create photos of my son when he was playing Little League. And occasionally he would be the pitcher. And I wanted to capture a sequence of the whole pitching motion from wind up to here to follow through. So 3 photos, not very hard. Modern cameras, our phones, no problem at all. We'd probably get 100 photos in that sequence. But this camera couldn't do it. You could get 1 photo, and then it would take about 2 or 3 seconds to be ready for the next photo. So what I did, because I couldn't get one sequence, what I did is I grabbed 3 different photos. I probably actually have 9, and then I picked the best 3 of the start of the windup, the middle of the windup, and then the follow through. So it's 3 separate photos of 3 separate pitches to get the final one that looks like one sequence because of those limits. Of course, the outfielder moved, so I had to Photoshop him out, but you get the idea. The limits forced me to find a way to still create what I wanted to create, that sequence of pitches. So we've been spoiled, as I said, I think. We expect the gear to do so much that we forget that there's no magic button on any camera that's create a better photo, create an interesting photo, create an emotional photo, create whatever kind of photo you want. That is all up here and here. So as you're thinking about and maybe potentially struggling with what all the possibilities before you even go out and create some photos, my suggestion, and this is something I practice, is to create some limits for yourself. Create some limits that are probably artificial, but still, they're limits. Create an assignment for yourself. That automatically creates a framework that you're going to work in. There's lots of ways to do that. You can create limits around where you're going to create photos. You could create limits about, like for me, I suffer from an embarrassment of riches of photo opportunities where I live. I could quickly hop down to Bellevue and create architecture photos if I wanted to, go a little farther to Seattle and create also architecture in older buildings and street photography and lots of different things. I can go a little bit to the east and capture lots of landscapes, capture lots of woodland photography, nature photography. There's all sorts of gardens around here. So there's lots and lots of options for photography. So choose one. When you don't know where to start somewhere. Pick one. Another limit I found helpful to me is to schedule a photography session for myself. To just tell myself, put it on my calendar, tell the fam, tell other people, hey, I'm going to be creating photos now. And that sets the limit of what you're not doing during that time. You're not doing other things, you're doing photography. Let's see, what other limits could you place? You could place limits on what kind of gear you use. A real easy one to do with that is to choose one lens to use and only use that lens for that photography session or for a period of time. Another way to ramp up that limit of just choosing one lens is not use your favorite lens, but to use your least used lens. And just use that for one session or for maybe a month. Really get to know it, discover what it can do, discover what it can't do, its limits. And by having that limit, it forces you to do other things in creating the photos that you don't normally do. I know I lean on a whole bunch of crutches, if you will, things I know work in photos, wide apertures and shallow depth of field. And if I can't rely on those, it makes me work differently, which is a good stretch. And there's freedom in exploring that. So if you're having trouble coming up with some limits for yourself, by all means, leave a comment below and I'll give you some ideas, basically an assignment to do or some ideas around limits. Or you can send me an email. I'll leave my contact info down below in the comments as well. And glad to send some assignment limits for you for your next photo session. So there you have it, some photography philosophy, at least my photography philosophy about limits, how I approach them from a perspective of freedom, realizing that in the limits, it helps me focus on what I can do because it helps me eliminate what I can't do. If you have thoughts you'd like to share about how you approach limits, how you react to limits, please share them below. If you're having maybe a particular limit you'd like to get some input on, I'd be glad to give my 2 cents if you want to leave that in the comment below as well. If you like this video, I sure would appreciate if you hit the like button. That also helps train the YouTube algorithm about videos that are helpful to you, so you get a benefit as well. Speaking of benefits for you, if you like this video, subscribe to this video and you'll get to see more of this stuff on a regular basis. As always, I hope you stay safe, stay well, and have fun creating photos. So until we meet again, bye for now.